Every morning at 5:30 a.m., before the first teacher arrived and long before any student set foot on campus, Harold Martinez pushed his worn cart through the empty hallways of Roosevelt Middle School. The wheels squeaked with each turn, creating a lonely symphony that echoed off the lockers. For 15 years, Harold had been the invisible guardian of these halls, the man who arrived in darkness and often left in darkness, ensuring that 800 students would walk into a clean, safe environment each day. But Harold carried a secret that weighed heavier than any mop bucket he'd ever lifted. The students barely noticed him. To them, he was just background noise, part of the school's infrastructure like the heating system or the bell that rang between classes. Some called him the quiet janitor, because he rarely spoke beyond a gentle nod or a soft-spoken "good morning" when their paths crossed. What they didn't know was that Harold noticed everything about them. He knew that Emma Rodriguez from the 7th grade always arrived early because her parents worked double shifts and couldn't drop her off later. He'd seen her sitting alone on the school steps many mornings, shivering in her thin jacket as she waited for the doors to open. Without saying a word, Harold had started arriving even earlier, making sure the front lobby was warm and accessible 30 minutes before official school hours. He knew that Marcus Thompson, the star of the basketball team, secretly struggled with reading. Harold had found him after school, sitting in the empty library, tears of frustration streaming down his face as he stared at a book that might as well have been written in a foreign language. Harold had quietly slipped a note to Mrs. Chen, the reading specialist, mentioning that perhaps the library could use better lighting in the back corner where students sometimes studied. He knew that Sarah Kim, who always seemed confident and popular during the day, was being bullied through cruel messages on social media that left her crying in the girls' bathroom during lunch. Harold had noticed the pattern, the red eyes, the way she'd lock herself in the far stall. He'd started leaving small, anonymous notes on the mirror: "You are braver than you believe, your smile brightens this whole school, someone believes in you today." But Harold's secret went deeper than his quiet acts of kindness. It went back to a promise he'd made 23 years ago, standing in a hospital room, holding the hand of his dying son. Miguel Martinez had been 12 years old when leukemia took him away from Harold and his wife, Carmen. Miguel had been everything to Harold: his baseball buddy, his homework helper, his reason for getting up every morning. The boy had dreams of becoming a teacher, of helping other kids learn and grow. He'd spent his final weeks making Harold promise something that seemed impossible at the time. "Papa," Miguel had whispered with the last of his strength, "promise me you'll find a way to help kids like me. Promise me you won't let them feel alone." Harold had promised, though he had no idea how a man with only a high school education and calloused hands could possibly fulfill such a vow. That's when he discovered that Roosevelt Middle School needed a janitor, and suddenly Harold understood. This wasn't just a job, it was his calling, his way of keeping Miguel's memory alive by becoming the guardian angel his son never had. For 15 years, Harold had been living that promise. He'd used nearly every penny of his modest salary beyond basic living expenses to secretly help the students of Roosevelt Middle School. He bought winter coats for kids who didn't have them, purchasing them during end-of-season sales and leaving them anonymously in lockers with notes saying they were lost and found items. He'd paid for countless school lunches for students whose accounts had run empty, always through the office, always anonymously. When the school's music program was cut due to budget constraints, Harold spent 6 months selling his beloved vintage record collection to buy instruments that he donated anonymously. The program was mysteriously restored when a community donor provided everything needed. The music teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, never knew that the donor was the quiet man who emptied his trash each evening. Harold had helped students in ways they'd never know. He'd paid for prescription glasses, for school supplies, for field trip fees that parents couldn't afford. He'd given up vacations, driven an old car held together with prayers and duct tape, and lived in the same small apartment for 15 years, all so he could keep helping the children who reminded him daily of the son he'd lost. The secret might have stayed buried forever if not for a routine visit from Harold's doctor that changed everything. Dr. Patricia Williams had been Harold's physician for 10 years, watching him work himself into exhaustion while refusing to spend money on his own health care. She'd seen the signs building for months, the shortness of breath, the persistent fatigue, the way Harold dismissed his own symptoms while asking her advice about helping a student with anxiety or another with what he suspected might be depression at home. "Harold," she said gently after running a series of tests, "I need you to sit down." The diagnosis hit like a physical blow. Advanced heart disease, likely caused by decades of stress, overwork, and a genetic predisposition that could have been managed if Harold had sought treatment earlier instead of spending all his money on others. The damage was extensive, and Dr. Williams explained that Harold would need immediate surgery followed by months of recovery. "The surgery alone will cost more than you make in 2 years, she said quietly. "And that's with the insurance the school district provides. Have you been saving? Do you have family who can help?" Harold thought about his empty savings account, about Carmen who cleaned houses 12 hours a day just to help them afford their basic expenses, about all the times he'd chosen to help a student instead of putting money aside for emergencies. He smiled sadly and shook his head. "I'll figure something out, doctor. I always do." But this time, Harold wasn't sure he could figure it out. For the first time in 15 years, the man who had been everyone else's silent hero felt completely alone. That's when fate intervened in the form of Emma Rodriguez, the girl who arrived early each morning. She was now an 8th grader, confident and mature beyond her years, and she'd been watching Harold more carefully than he realized. Emma had noticed that their quiet janitor looked tired, that his usual gentle smile seemed forced, that he'd been sitting down more often during his work. Emma's curiosity led her to follow Harold after school one day, not to be nosy, but because she was genuinely worried about the man who had somehow always made her feel safer and more welcome at school. She watched him stop at the office and heard fragments of a phone conversation about medical bills and surgery that he couldn't afford. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about all the small kindnesses she'd experienced at Roosevelt Middle School over the years, the warm building when she arrived early, the encouraging notes that appeared when she needed them most, the feeling that someone was watching out for all the students even when they didn't realize it. She'd always assumed these things just happened naturally, but now she began to wonder. Emma started investigating, asking careful questions, paying attention to patterns. She noticed that students who struggled financially somehow always had what they needed. She observed how Harold's work cart always seemed to be in the right place at the right time, near the bathroom when someone was crying, in the hallway when a student dropped their books, by the nurse's office when someone wasn't feeling well. The breakthrough came when Emma found a receipt that had fallen from Harold's pocket. It was for 3 winter coats, purchased the day before 3 8th-grade students had mysteriously found coats in their lockers with "lost and found" tags. The receipt was dated, timed, and matched perfectly. Emma's discovery led to more careful observation, and soon she had pieced together the incredible truth. Harold Martinez, their quiet janitor, had been secretly taking care of the entire school for 15 years. He wasn't just cleaning their classrooms, he was healing their hearts, solving their problems, and carrying their burdens without ever asking for recognition or thanks. Emma knew she had to act, but she also knew Harold was too proud to accept direct help. So she did something that would change everything for everyone at Roosevelt Middle School. She told the truth. It started with Emma approaching Mrs. Patterson, the principal, with her discoveries. Mrs. Patterson was skeptical at first, but as Emma presented her evidence, the receipts, the patterns, the timeline of Harold's kindnesses matching exactly with anonymous donations and mysterious solutions to student problems, the truth became undeniable. Mrs. Patterson called an emergency meeting with the school staff, sharing Emma's findings. Teacher after teacher began connecting the dots, remembering times when their students' needs had been mysteriously met, when problems had been solved by anonymous benefactors, when the right resources had appeared at exactly the right moment. They realized that their quiet janitor had been their students' secret guardian angel for 15 years. The faculty decided unanimously that the entire school community needed to know Harold's story. They planned an assembly, ostensibly for a special recognition ceremony, and made sure Harold would be in the auditorium for what he thought was routine maintenance work. On a crisp Thursday morning in November, all 800 students and every faculty member gathered in the Roosevelt Middle School auditorium. Harold was in the back, organizing chairs and thinking about how he would tell Carmen about his medical bills, when Principal Patterson stepped to the microphone. "Today, we're here to honor someone who has been the heart and soul of our school for 15 years, she began. "Someone who has shown us what it means to love unconditionally, to give without expecting anything in return, and to be a true hero in the most humble way possible." Emma Rodriguez stepped forward and began telling Harold's story. She talked about the coats, the lunch payments, the musical instruments, the notes of encouragement. She explained how one man had quietly dedicated his life to making sure every student at Roosevelt Middle School felt loved, supported, and valued. As Emma spoke, Harold realized that somehow, his secret had been discovered. He tried to slip out quietly, embarrassed by the attention, but Mrs. Patterson gently guided him to the front of the auditorium. What happened next would be remembered at Roosevelt Middle School for generations to come. One by one, students began standing up. Marcus Thompson, now a confident reader and high school senior visiting for the assembly, stood first. "Mr. Harold," he said, his voice cracking, "I never told you, but somehow you knew I was struggling to read, and somehow the library got better lighting exactly where I needed it most. Thank you for seeing me." Sarah Kim, now in high school and a peer counseling volunteer, stood next. "The notes you left in the bathroom mirror," she said through tears, "saved my life during the darkest time I'd ever experienced. You gave me hope when I had none left." Student after student stood, sharing stories of Harold's kindness. Some remembered coats that appeared in their lockers. Others talked about lunch accounts that were mysteriously refilled. Several mentioned the returned music program that had changed their lives. Each story revealed another layer of Harold's 15-year mission of love. But the most powerful moment came when Emma Rodriguez stepped forward with a large envelope. "Mr. Harold," she said, "we learned about your medical situation, and we learned about your son Miguel. We understand now why you've spent your life taking care of all of us. But now it's time for us to take care of you." The envelope contained over $100,000, money raised in just 2 weeks by the Roosevelt Middle School community and alumni who had heard Harold's story. Current students had organized bake sales and car washes. Teachers had donated personal funds. Parents had contributed from their family's savings. Alumni from Harold's 15 years had sent money from across the country when they learned about the janitor who had quietly improved their lives during their most formative years. But more than the money, the envelope contained hundreds of letters. Letters from students thanking Harold for kindnesses they'd never understood at the time. Letters from teachers who now realized why their students had always seemed to have what they needed. Letters from parents grateful for the invisible angel who had watched over their children. As Harold read letter after letter, tears streaming down his weathered face, the entire auditorium, 800 students, dozens of faculty members, and scores of parents, wept together. They wept for Harold's sacrifice, for his love, for his loss, and for the beautiful way he had honored his son's memory by becoming a father figure to hundreds of children over 15 years. Harold finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying to every corner of the silent auditorium. 23 years ago, my son Miguel made me promise to help kids like him, to make sure they never felt alone. I thought I was keeping that promise by taking care of all of you. But today, I realize Miguel's real gift to me wasn't the promise, it was leading me to this school, to all of you, so that you could teach me what it really means to be part of a family." The assembly ended with the entire school singing, "Amazing Grace," Miguel's favorite song, while Harold stood surrounded by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched without them even knowing it. Harold underwent successful heart surgery 3 weeks later, paid for entirely by his Roosevelt Middle School family. During his recovery, students visited him daily, bringing homework help to his apartment, not because they needed help with their studies, but because they wanted to take care of the man who had taken care of them for so long. When Harold returned to work 4 months later, he found that the school district had promoted him to Director of Student Support Services, a position created specifically for him. His job was to continue doing exactly what he'd been doing for 15 years, but now with the full support and resources of the school system behind him. Roosevelt Middle School also established the Miguel Martinez Memorial Fund, ensuring that future students would continue receiving the same anonymous support that Harold had been providing, but now with sustainable funding from the community that had learned to love as generously as their quiet janitor. Harold still arrives at school at 5:30 a.m., but now it's not out of necessity. It's because Roosevelt Middle School is where his heart lives, where Miguel's promise continues to be fulfilled, and where he learned that the greatest secret of all is that love, when given freely and without expectation, always finds its way back home multiplied beyond anything we could ever imagine. The janitor's secret didn't just make an entire school cry, it made an entire community understand that heroism isn't about grand gestures or public recognition. It's about showing up every day with love in your heart and the determination to make someone else's life a little bit brighter, even if they never know your name. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Pure Kindness Stories for more inspiring tales that remind us of the good in humanity. Share Harold's story with someone who needs to be reminded that kindness is never wasted, that love always matters, and that sometimes the most powerful heroes are the ones working quietly behind the scenes, making the world better one small act of compassion at a time. Remember, you never know whose life you might be changing with your own acts of kindness, so keep spreading love wherever you go.